Welcome, colleagues, to KSU's Research with Relevance Friday Features. We are back on the Kennesaw campus for the last episode of the Dean's Showcase. We are live streaming this show on KSU TV from the Catherine Scott Rehearsal Hall in the Dr. Bobby Bailey and Family Performance Center. I am joined by Dr. Ivan Pulinkala. He is our last dean of the 4 showcase this semester. Dr. Pulinkala is also serving as the interim provost here at KSU, and we're so thrilled for you to be joining us today. My name is Phaedra Corso, and I'm the Vice President for Research, and I have been your host for this show. I call it a show. I've been your host for a couple of semesters now. I think we're in our 4th, and it has been truly a pleasure to do this. And I just want, for all of the fans out there, I just want to let you know that we are going to be doing this show again next semester. And we just made the executive decision, Ivan and I, that we are going to feature chairs and directors. So you might be getting a call from me sometime soon. So let me just tell you a few housekeeping tips before we start. First, when we open the floor up for questions from the audience, you'll notice that we have 2 microphones on either side of the room, so please use those. Second, if you leave the auditorium during the live stream, please walk to the closest exit and be as quiet as possible, and we may not let you back in because there's a little bit of a noise thing here. And since this is a live stream, I'm going to give you the opportunity to turn off your phones now, please. For our virtual audience that's watching on KSU TV, if you click on the Research with Relevance button that is on our homepage at research.kennesaw.edu, you can submit a question by scrolling down to the Discuss comment section. If you have problems with this, you can also email us and send in your questions. I'll be monitoring my phone periodically to look at those questions. And really, I encourage you all to ask questions because we have the provost sitting here. So this is our chance to really, get some good information from him. I have some questions that are prepared also that I'll start the show with after we watch our video presentation. And so that's the plan for the next hour. So let's begin. Let me start with an introduction of Ivan Pulinkala. So Ivan is a choreographic artist, dance educator, and scholar. Traditional choreography is led by the choreographic artist serving as the primary content creator. Yet his body of scholarship, which you're going to see in a moment, has been guided through a technique of working with interdisciplinary collaborators in a process he terms disruptive collaborations. Ivan joined Kennesaw State University in 2005 and founded KSU's Department of Dance, a program he developed into the largest collegiate dance program in Georgia. Congratulations. The department has received regional and national attention for Ivan's choreographic work at the American College Dance Festival, being the only choreographer in its history to have work selected for 3 successful national festivals. He also was instrumental in the development of the dance theater on the Marietta campus, Atlanta's first theater designed specifically for dance. Ivan has served as the department's first chair until he became the College of the Arts dean in 2019, and then taking on the interim provost role this year. He has worked professionally in the field of dance and musical theater both in India and in the US, and his work has been commissioned by professional and collegiate dance companies. He is a distinguished leader in the arts community. Wow, this is a long intro. It's because he's so outstanding. Ivan received his doctorate in higher education administration from the University of Alabama. And I know we're all looking forward to seeing the video now.
My name is Ivan Pulinkala. I'm a professor of dance at Kennesaw State University and dean of the College of the Arts, currently serving as the interim provost and vice president for academic affairs. The following presentation highlights my work as a choreographic artist over the past few years in a process I term disruptive collaboration. Traditional choreographic processes typically call for the development of artistic choices based on the aesthetic values outlined by the choreographer serving as the primary content creator. Other artistic collaborators often respond to the choreographer's primary intellectual, physical, and aesthetic choices, often entering the process after it begins to physically and aesthetically manifest. This traditional process follows the logic that one vision should guide the development of the creative process, with the choreographer bringing their ideas to the project first and then inviting collaborators to respond in support of their vision. My process intentionally defies the norms of traditional choreographic inquiry to engage the collaboration of other artists and disciplinary experts in a process sequencing that changes the outcome and the choreographic product. The principle I am hoping to share with you today is best understood in the context of individual choreographic works with tangible examples from my body of scholarship. For this purpose, I'm going to highlight 3 recent works: Metamorphosis, a work that premiered in 2017, Moondust, a work that premiered in 2020, and a new work that was filmed in summer 2021, featuring a collaboration led by a colleague from Georgia Tech. Metamorphosis was a 45-minute evening-length work created to celebrate the opening of the dance theater on the Marietta campus. This work remains the most complex collaboration I have ever attempted, as it involved a scenic designer, a visual effects designer, a lighting designer, a costume designer, a student researcher collecting qualitative personal interview data, 2 original musical scores commissioned from a student composer and a professional choral composer, and a live chorus of 60 singers who appear in the final moments of the work. The theme of transformation was inspired by the renovation of the old theater on the Marietta campus into a state-of-the-art dance theater. However, I decided to use the theme metaphorically to explore the transformation of mind, body, and spirit that occurs through education. To disrupt the traditional choreographic process that would typically begin in a studio and typically involve the creation of movement, I worked with an undergraduate student to conduct interviews across campus exploring the idea of educational transformation. I wanted my directed study student to understand the principles of IRB protocols, qualitative interview techniques, data collection, transcription, and triangulation. The interviews were videotaped with volunteer consent and then juxtaposed into a short video montage that became the central core of the work. The interviews sparked ideas for 2 large scenic pieces that included an abstract structure representing the synapses of the brain, as well as a large book representing the repository of knowledge. The visual designer then played with these ideas, building an LED wall on the cover of the book that served as a background for some of the choreographed movement. A montage of the interviews played in the center of the work, contextualizing several different personal narratives into one story of educational metamorphosis. The musical score responded to these interviews, and the choral composer used poetic prose from Greek philosophers around the theme of knowledge empowerment to develop the lyrics for the chorus. Finally, after months of researching and designing, came the actual choreographic process. At this point, extremely limited by the choices made by the design team. The score had been created, the scenic structures designed and built, the interviews triangulated, and the lighting and costume designs well underway. Metamorphosis finally physically developed in the studio as a culmination of this process, and its final product very much a result of the collaborative disruptions that resulted in the limitations I embraced to change the choreographic outcomes in this project. The approach to Moondust was also guided by the principle of disruptive collaboration, but engaged a very different creative process. I was now serving as the Dean of the College of the Arts and interested in a collaboration with another disciplinary college. I had been reading a lot about near-death experiences, namely through the personal narratives of individuals who had been declared clinically dead but restored to life thanks to medical science, only to return and describe an experience of what they believed to be an afterlife. I was not interested in getting into the debate between science and religion about the plausibility of near-death experiences, but rather wanted to explore the personal narratives in the context of my own experience with loss. I became fascinated with a well-known near-death experience book, Proof of Heaven, by neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander, who came out of a long coma to narrate his experience of moving through different realms of what he described as the afterlife. I needed to find a collaborator who could visually transform the experience of the audience to represent the realms of the afterlife described in the near-death experience personal narratives, and the College of Computing and Software Engineering seemed to be the best candidate for the job. Working with a small research team, I spent the summer building visuals for a video that would be projected on a scrim covering the entire front of the stage. The result would be somewhat the equivalent of watching live dancers inside a movie screen. The plan was for the dancers to interact with the video and for the video to seamlessly move the choreography into a variety of visual realms. Once again, the choreographic process was limited by the computer-aided design that was developed before the choreographic process even began. Allowing my computing and software engineering collaborators the primacy of content development within the confines of the theme was a welcome disruption to my choreographic process that now required the dancers to be at a particular place in a particular way to interface with the visual design as the movement was being created for this work. I will end this research showcase by introducing you to my latest collaborative adventure with a colleague, Gil Weinberg from Georgia Tech. I was invited to join this project earlier this summer by Dr. Weinberg, who was looking for a choreographer to explore the interface of movement with 12 robotic arms developed in the School of Music at Georgia Tech. This NSF-funded pilot project was intended to be additive to the robotic techniques Dr. Weinberg had developed to create musical choices and augment the capacity of individuals through highly functional robotic prosthetics. I was immediately drawn to the project as it perfectly fit my interests in pursuing disruptive collaborations. This project was well underway when Dr. Weinberg invited me to serve as the co-artistic director. The 12 robotic arms were being created, and conversations immediately ensued about their placement on stage and their intersectionality with the dancers. For about a month and a half, I worked closely with the student robotics programmer on Dr. Weinberg's team to choreograph movement for the robotic arms. It was the first time I was choreographing non-living objects. Multiple programming techniques were used to develop the movement of the robots. A goal was to literally breathe life into the robotic arms and give them human physicality. Finally came the process of adding dancers to this project. Once again, the choreography was defined within the constructs of the collaboration. In this case, the robotic arms had been placed in particular ways across the stage and their movements pre-programmed. The dancers went through a socialization process with the robots, and the choreography was generated in response to the robotic movement. The result was once again determined by giving the other collaborator sequential primacy in content creation. There is no secret formula to choreographing, and collaborations are not new to the process of choreographic inquiry. However, my interests defy the traditional norms of asking collaborators to respond to the impulses of a choreographer serving as the primary artist. Disruptive collaborations engage the capacities of the collaborators in ways that confine the development of movement ideas, resulting in a choreographic product that is developmentally and presentationally unique.
Through my invisible revelations, we will be taught again to overcome.
That was really, really terrific. I have just written down 10 more questions to my list of 10 that I originally started with. So I'm sure you all have questions to ask too. So at any point, come up to the mics and let us hear from you. But let me start off, Ivan, first of all, and say what an incredible body of work. And I want to start kind of big picture, and then I'm going to dive into each of the research projects that you talked about. So disruptive collaboration, what was your inspiration for doing that kind of work?
So actually, it's an interesting story. Several years ago, I was serving as chair of the Department of Dance, and I reached out to a colleague in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies and asked if we could do a collaboration. She was a lighting designer, and she agreed, and we set a date to meet and talk about the work that we would create in the fall. This was in the spring. A couple of weeks went by, and I looked up from my desk one day, and there she was in the doorway, and I realized I had not even had a minute to even think about what I wanted to do. And so she came, and she sat down, and she said, "So, what are we doing?" And I looked at her, and I was about to admit that I hadn't really even thought about it, and I just looked at her, and I thought, what's the most ridiculous thing I could say to a lighting designer? And so I said, so I have this idea that we can use no lights in this piece. And she looked at me, she kind of paused, and then she said, "That's interesting." And I thought, it is? Okay. And so we went from there, and what developed out of that was a work called Rhizome that was created. It is performed in a complete blackout in the theater. So no theatrical lighting is used whatsoever. The only lighting used for the work are handheld lights that the dancers have, and a couple of lights that were fit into the scenery. And the dancers control the lighting throughout the piece. It was a frustrating process to go through because it was extremely limiting. So when we were in the studio working, imagine holding a flashlight, and that's the only light source you have to light the movement. So you cannot just choreograph whatever you want and then have the lighting designer respond to it. You can only choreograph within the shaft of the light or figure out adding another light source. So it was a lengthy process, and one that I came out of realizing that those limitations had really pushed me and challenged me to investigate movement in a way I would have never done without the limitations. So that was the start of this idea. I didn't have a term for it. I don't know if I have a great term for it today, but I call it a disruptive collaboration because it actually disrupts my choreographic thought or aesthetic idea, and it actually, by creating some limitations, it forces the dancers and the choreographer to work in unique ways.
Mm-hmm. Good. And so choreography, as I think I heard you say, is typically at the beginning of the creative process. And what you're showing us is doesn't have to be at the beginning of the process. Are you the only one working in this space?
So definitely not. And let me just also clarify. So often in a traditional choreographic process, a choreographer does have collaborators. Dance very seldom exists in a vacuum, right? So that's why I made the comment in the video that collaborations are not new to the dance world. They're kind of what we do. What's different here are two very specific things. The collaborations tend to be with the theatrical art forms, right? So you have music and lighting and costume design, scenic design, film, increasingly coming into that world as well. So number one, I'm interested in exploring a discipline that I know absolutely nothing about. And I can safely say that of at least 2 out of the 3 things there, not the research part. And then the other part of it is, in most collaborations, there's always the primary artist in the dance world that tends to be the choreographer, and their vision guides the decision-making process often, or let's just say it certainly dominates it. And what I found interesting was to explore the notion of actually handing the process over to somebody else and letting them respond to an idea or a theme. And trusting or limiting yourself or having the discipline to then say, no matter what the choices they make, you will live within those confines and discover a world. And so that's, I don't know if I explained that well, but that's kind of the sense of it.
Okay, so you use this term, I wrote this down just now in the video, sequential privacy in the contribution.
So sequential primacy.
Primacy.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So what I mean is that in the sequence of things, so a traditional process, choreographic process, typically, not always, but typically will begin with movement invention in a studio, right? So you're creating language, movement language, and then you start to develop that, bring in collaborators and respond to it. So when I say giving sequential primacy, I'm bringing in the collaborator in the beginning and letting them make the big choices that locks in the world that the dance will be in. So in the sequence of things, they're given the primacy to make the choices, and then the dance lives in the aesthetic world that's created by the other collaborator.
Okay, got it. So give me an example, if there is one, where the world that was created for the dancers was not necessarily what you wanted it to be.
Wow. Now you're asking me to reveal industry secrets.
Right, sorry.
So I don't. So in Moondust, worked with the team in the College of Computing and Software Engineering, and they were using, I think they're called particles, Sumant. I don't know what are those, where they have these sort of databases of particles or whatever that they're putting together. Every single visual that's created in there was created in the lab. It's not something that's farmed from an external source. And so they created it and they responded to some of these thematic ideas I gave them. That's a long work, and so we created these episodes that they could respond to. I'll be honest in saying about half the episodes were not what I imagined in my head at all, and what I thought we were talking about. However, I had made a commitment to living in their world that they were creating, so I let them create it. And then the dance came later and responded to it and fit into it somehow.
Great. So let's talk about the Georgia Tech project that you have going on. How did your colleague know to get in touch with you?
So I've known Gil for several years. He actually was an ACE fellow at Kennesaw State University several years ago, and that's where I met him. I'd been to his lab and seen the work he's done. He's gotten his reputation is pretty incredible in the field. And he's an artist, he's a musician himself, so we've known each other for many years, and so he just gave me a call this past summer and said, I got this project, why don't you come and look at it, and that's how that started.
So explain to me a little bit more. Is it that what Gil's doing is creating the movement of the robots first, and then your dancers come behind, or is it an interaction?
So what happened was, so Gil and his research team, his students, they created the Robotic Arms. So when I went to the studio, we looked at some of the functionality. Then they created 12 of them, and we made a decision how to place them on the stage floor. So right there, all of that was set. In terms of the movement of the robots, it was actually a collaborative effort between one of his graduate research assistants and me sitting down together. It took about a month. And I would always leave every day by thinking, what's the most ridiculous thing I can ask him to do? So I would say, make the robots breathe next time, Gil. Make me believe that they're breathing. And so the next time I would go and the arm would be doing this, Right. And I'd say, how can it roll up its spine, right? And then he'd work on that. So it was kind of a iterative process, and he would respond to certain things. He went and looked at some of my choreography, and he created algorithms based on past choreographic works of mine, and then he used those to see what would happen with the robots, and then I would respond to the movement. So it was kind of we were just kind of fooling around
I
in
love
the,
it.
in
It's
the studio.
he put a mathematical formula to your choreography. I like
Yeah.
that. So this is a project that's federally funded. Why is the federal government interested in funding work like this? What are the practical implications?
So I think, in terms of talking just high level, if you ask, Gil will probably give you a slightly different answer to this question. But from his perspective, what he said to me is he wants to create this interface between robots and humans coexisting, which already happens in many spheres of our life, but helping to socialize that even further, and certainly in an art form. To me, I look at it the opposite way too. It's also making a robot more human, right? And to have feelings and impulses, because you're using artificial intelligence in certain parts to make the robot make its own decisions of movement. So part of the goal of this project as it moves forward is that we would find a way for the robots to make their own independent, I say we, I know nothing about robots. They would find a way to make the robotic arms make independent choices, but in response to movers, people in front of them.
Right. So what happens next with that research?
So in terms of the sort of pilot project that you saw, the goal is we're working currently on writing a paper. It's interesting because they have all this technical language. I don't, right? Or my technical language is not theirs. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. About this process, certainly the goal they have is to apply for more funding, get more robots. The piece is called Forest, so they want to create a forest of robots. I don't know what that'll look like. Pie in the sky ideal is to create a 1-hour show and pitch it to a Broadway producer and, I don't know,
Nice.
retire.
So when you write an article, or when you write a journal article with such very different fields, which field do you publish in?
So actually, that's a great question. So
I know.
that's what we're currently, of course, our VP for research. You would know this. So we're currently looking at several. It's going to be in their field of sort of, from what I understand with my limited knowledge, is there's several different ways they can go, right? They can go in and work with music, because as you can see, there are robots playing instruments, and they have some music journals that they have published in before, but there's lots of engineering and robotics journals as well, which is what they're looking at. Of course, there's the arts, but I'm interested in going into their world, so I think that's what we're going to do.
So you mentioned with the first research project, the involvement of students collecting data that kind of, it seems like your research surrounded what the students found, or took what they found and embellished it. What role do students play in general in the research that you conduct?
So they are central to it. They are the heart and soul of it. I think being in higher ed, that's one of the greatest gifts we have, is to work with these inquisitive minds and bodies and spirits, right? And so I'm very interested in the students who are in front of me. I always say, I can work with pretty much anyone. And I say that because it's not about me bringing movement to the table and asking someone to copy it. It's about working collaboratively with someone and developing language that then turns into dance. So I once had a student who came to a rehearsal with a skateboard under his arm, and I said, "What can you do with that thing?" And he zipped around the studio. Well, it was in the piece 3 months later. So very interested in what the students bring to the project and how they respond to the ideas. So they are central to my work.
So I just want to remind you, I'm not the only one to ask questions here, so please come on up to the mics. And I think we have a question that's come in. Okay, here it is. This is this question. I'm thinking of the concept of disruptive innovation that often offers surprising outcomes. How did this disruptive collaborative process provide surprising artistic results in your work, and how do your collaborators receive these possibilities? It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think throughout the work, everything is a surprise in so many ways, right? So I'll use Moondust as an example. There are many parts of the piece where there's a comet moving across the stage, and the idea was that we wanted the human for it to represent, you know, you can look at it metaphorically however you want, but this person pulling a comet along, right? So there are many different ways in which we tried that, and it didn't work at first. And so eventually, it really was a collaboration between the computing artists and the students, and how they actually made that interface come together so that the dancer was there at the right moment and moving at the right speed with the comet. So the audience had this sense of the comet being pulled along by the human. So lots of discoveries that happened through the process. And to me, all of it is kind of a surprise.
How many times did they have to practice to get that perfect?
Enough.
And it was perfect, actually. We do have a question from the audience.
Good afternoon, Ivan. So, Metamorphosis, most people, certainly I always think about Kafka and some of his work, and a lot of his work tends to be degenerative rather than what you showed was regenerative. Were you thinking about Kafka in that sense of metamorphosis and a regeneration rather than a degeneration?
Right. I think, you know, the way I'd respond to that is, I don't know if I was thinking in those terms. I was thinking in terms of kind of an educational metamorphosis or transformation of the mind. And so the kind of research question posed to the students across campus was to talk about a transformative experience they had during their college career. So the reason I'm explaining that is the whole theme and the ideology of the piece came out of those interviews. What shocked me was I expected the students to respond and talk about, you know, a literature class they were in or a science class they were in, and how it really moved them. Not one of them talked about a classroom experience. However, every one of their experiences, they were personal, very, very personal. But they were definitely inspired by the transformation that happened because of that curricular experience they had, if that makes sense. And so the piece developed based on those themes that came out of all of the student interviews. I don't know if I answered your question well, but.
Yeah, I think you did. We didn't hear the students talking, so we don't know
Correct.
what they were actually
Correct.
sharing with us.
Sure.
Thank you for that question, Dean Ferguson. And if you want a job as host for next semester, give me a call. We have another question.
Hi, that was wonderful. So when you talk about this idea of disruption, clearly it's an idea of veering off from the established past. And I know that you have done a lot of this when you've been in a more administrative role, but if you were thinking about how it might change your approach to teaching, did this have any kind of bearing on how you might look at the fundamentals or basics, or is this something that might be more appropriate to some more advanced kinds of things, the things that you've learned from this kind of research?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Definitely has a huge impact on how I teach and you know, what I believe in, right? And I think that's what's amazing about being at a university. We get to have these creative explorations to move our fields forward, but at the end of the day, the people they impact the most are our students. So the answer is yes, and in terms of how, I will say it's about actually, I think I've learned to trust the students more and not feel like I need to come in with all the answers. And what I really believe in actually through working this way is that you need to come in with good questions. And then you need to work with the community around you to develop the answers. And so that would be a sort of definitely a pedagogical shift that I've had from maybe 20 years ago when I taught a dance class, and it was more traditional methodology of copying movement, perhaps.
Thank you.
I'm going to take Amanda's question and bring it to another group of stakeholders. You are now in a new role as interim provost, and we've all seen your leadership style, and I'm very impressed by your leadership style, and I wonder how much of the work that you've done here, talking about disruptive collaboration, has influenced your leadership style as a provost.
Definitely disrupted the fourth floor. I'm kidding. We have an amazing team, so just truly grateful for the support and learning that's occurring for me in the role. In terms of the impact, I think the principles are the same, right? In leadership, you don't need to have all the answers. In fact, you shouldn't when you work in a community and you serve a community. You need to have good questions. You need to help those answers develop, in a way that allows us to dig deeper into an issue or an idea. So I think the principles still apply, very much so. And I think what I love about working with dancers and choreographing is the same thing that I love about serving an academic community, and it's the word community.
I see a book. Does anyone else see this book on academic leadership as what's taught through choreography? I mean, I don't know, or what's learned through choreography. We have another question, Mark?
Thank you, that was wonderful. So I guess choreography is a mystery to me. I feel like I can appreciate it, but the process is mystifying. And you mentioned when you gave someone else primacy, it limited what you could do. And I wonder if that could make it, you mentioned frustration with flashlights, but do the limitations make it easier, or is it easier to walk into a studio with a blank slate and start with no boundaries?
Sure. So of course it's easier to have no boundaries, right? Because you go in there and you make lots of decisions. I also think a lot of unsuccessful dancers are created because you don't have enough boundaries, right? So you have too many ideas, you have too much freedom, and every time you hit a wall, you turn another direction because it's easy to do that and get out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. So what this approach has helped me with, it is very limiting, right? Because this other collaborator has come in and limited the world down to a very specific thing that can happen in a very specific way. And I say frustrating because, of course, your impulse is to want to do anything, right, that your body is propelling you to do. However, the limitation makes you look at movement in a very particular way, in a specific way, and makes you explore a very particular zone of movement. And so I have found that the results tend to be a lot more interesting as the outcome happens. In its discovery, you hit a lot of walls. And there are days when you are working with the elements and you go home and you think there was nothing good that came out of there. But I cannot use any of that material. But what I've told students is that sometimes when I teach choreography, I say it's like peeling an onion. And sometimes you just got to keep peeling if you're not happy with the layer you're in. But you will find that layer, and then you can kind of live there for a little while, and then peel again, perhaps.
Great. So, as a choreographer, what do you enjoy most about dance as a scholar and as an artist?
So, this has been a journey. I will say, so I came to Kennesaw State in 2005, and I was hired into the Department of Theater and Performance Studies. I did not know what performance studies was at the time. And I thought, what do these people do? And it was an amazing opportunity to be in this community of theater artists and scholars who had embodied, the chair at the time, Dr. John Gentile, had brought this idea of the scholar artist to the table. And this department had really embodied that. They were one of the few in the country. I believe Yale just changed their name to Theater and Performance Studies. So KSU was ahead of the game there. But I will say, being in that world and community, I really understood how important it was to research an idea, and that the scholarly discovery was just as important as the creative discovery. And quite frankly, I think one without the other doesn't result in good work. So it's become part of my philosophy for my own personal practice, but it's what I strive to teach my students, and that is that take your idea and research it, make scholarly sense of it just as much as you need to make creative sense of it.
Do you have a signature style? Is that even an appropriate thing to ask?
So, I had a choreography teacher in grad school, and you'd come in and you'd do this solo, and then she'd say, "Great, now I've seen that, don't ever do that again for the rest of the semester." Right? And she was not kidding. If she saw you do the same movement, she'd stop you and say, "Didn't we see that 3 weeks ago?" And she was really trying to teach us the discipline of not repeating, not repeating yourself. So, I don't know if I have a signature, definitely not a signature move. Actually, I say that, and I bet you Andrea sitting here could probably tell you what it is, because I can't see it, right? But I think it's more about what I love to do is make every project move into a completely different world. So you saw 3 pieces that actually were almost done in succession, and I think that's what's interesting, is to push myself to go to a completely different aesthetic world to discover a work.
So I'm going to ask you to put your dean hat back on for a second. What do you hope for the future of your college in terms of big ideas, which I know you're a big thinker? So in 5 years, what does your college look like?
So Arts KSU is pretty amazing, and an exciting place to be with an incredible community of faculty, staff, administrators, students. The big idea would be to develop the arts district here at KSU, and it's an idea we've talked about. If anyone out there would like to fund it, give me a call.
We'll be passing a hat.
Right. But we're knocking on doors to make that happen. And the reason that's interesting to me is when we say it's an arts district, it would really be this incredible laboratory for the discovery of arts and scholarship in the arts, and the creation of artist residencies and maybe after-school programs. That's kind of the big picture idea, but then also have maker spaces and spaces for our students and faculty and staff to be together and discover, and for the arts to be in a community. We certainly are trained in these silos, right? Dance, theater, music, art and design, and then even within our disciplines and even smaller silos. But being in a little arts village of sorts, it would be really exciting to see what comes out of that in terms of what work comes out of it, what our students do, what our faculty and staff create, and what the community around here experiences.
Are we close?
We are inching our way forward, I'll say that.
Well, I think I can speak for everyone in the room that we are, it's wonderful to have you here at KSU. And your video, which is a little bit different than the other Dean's Showcase videos, didn't tell much of a personal story. So since there's nobody at the mics, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your personal story. You don't have to, bring out any skeletons. I just want to know, how did you come to KSU?
Thank you for that permission. No, I mean, my life's not that exciting, but sure. I grew up in New Delhi. That's where I was born and raised. My career started fairly early. At about 14, I got my first gig, as they call it. By 16, was doing a lot of professional musical theater. I started with music, found theater, and through theater I found dance.
So music instrument?
Yeah, I played the piano for a few years as a
I
kid.
think we have somebody roll that piano over here.
Believe me, you don't want to hear
I've heard your
anything
singing
right now.
voice, so I know you've got that talent as well.
So yeah, so that's kind of where things started. I got my undergraduate degree in business from Hindu College at Delhi University, and continued to perform while I was in college. Started my own dance company that I had for about 3 years before realizing, if I want to do this, maybe I should go get a master's degree. And that's what brought me to the States. Got my MFA in dance at Mills College in California. Had a mentor there who had worked with the Paul Taylor dance company. And so she spoke with Paul Taylor and sent me to study at the school for a year in New York. And so I lived the New York life, couch surfing, and at one point had, I think, 9 jobs a week. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And did that. And then someone sent me an ad. One of my other mentors from grad school sent me an ad for a professorship at Murray State University in Kentucky. And I thought, a professor? I don't know what that is.
In Kentucky.
That was, yes, never been there either. And so I did that, and I fell in love with teaching and being in higher ed, and moved to KSU. In 2005, I was hired, I had a fancy title, Director of Dance. The truth is the only person I was directing was myself. So from there started the dance program with wonderful colleagues in theater and performance studies here, and yeah.
So tell me about some of your students and who has made you the most proud and where they've gone
wow.
and what they've done.
Now you're really putting me on the spot.
I'm sorry. You don't have to name
well,
names, but
Well, I will tell you Simone Stevens, one of our grads, just got hired at Hubbard Street Dance. That's one of the top companies in the world,
Wow.
not just the US. So we're very proud of her. But we're really proud of every one of our students. And what is incredible about this community of artists, and I include all of the departments, is that I think the faculty here are really committed to training the whole person, right? So it's not about just giving you a couple of technical tools to work with. It's really about developing yourself and letting you discover what part of the field you can thrive in. So we have students who, we have a student who's working with, actually several who are working with top dance companies in the production side of the house. There are students who are certainly performing, some who are touring the world, performing in touring shows, or some on cruise ships. We have arts administrators, and the assistant production manager at the Atlanta Ballet is an alum of KSU Dance. So we're proud of all of them, and this kind of pluralistic approach to developing a dance professional, I think, is evidenced in the kind of work our students are doing in so many different spheres.
so the College of the Arts just started a new master's program this year. Congratulations on that. Are there plans to move into other graduate education programs?
Definitely. I know the School of Music is chomping at the bit, and quite honestly should be, because it's an incredible place, and they're definitely ready. So there definitely are other plans, and I know the faculty will probably have a lot better ideas than I do of what they can be, but the simple answer is yes.
And another question on research. So, we launched the R2 roadmap a couple years ago. We're all about research with relevance. And I have been so pleased to see that the College of the Arts has embraced this the same, if not more than, several of the other colleges. And I wonder if you could talk about what you all are doing in the research space.
Yes, and so really credit goes to our faculty and staff, and they truly believe in this, right? So, and of course, when we talk about research in the arts, It's both scholarship and creative activity. And there is this duality in the training of our students, in the way in which faculty sort of exist in the college that I think is evidenced. In terms of research, and when you say what are we doing, we formed a research advisory council. There are several research events that occur every year, where students present their research throughout the semester. So Peter could probably give you the entire list there, but to sum it up, it's something that's, I think, already built into the fabric of what this college does, and that's because of the value system the faculty and staff have.
Great. We have a question?
And I'm not doing it to save you from the next further question. I mean, it'll come anyway. So, and I'm sorry, I'm going back to this idea of collaboration, and it took me a while to elaborate really what I was thinking. You say something about the collaboration with CCSE, and I saw a difference in studying the next collaboration you had with the Georgia Tech, your collaboration at Georgia Tech. And it seems to me you said that, and I saw something similar in your first one, but that you had a construction and you had a limit, right? And you were working in this limit. And so somehow the limit that computing people gave to you taught you something, helped you do something. While it seems to me that with the Georgia Tech collaboration, there is a back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, what could be the next step in which you put constraint on another discipline and what you could teach with dance to another discipline, constraining them? And I'm asking I admire art very much, and I have zero talent in any possible art. So I'm asking with admiration and hoping to learn something. Thank you.
So it's a great question, and actually in a traditional process, in many ways, that's what we're doing as choreographers, right? We're coming up with an aesthetic idea or world, and then we're forcing the other collaborator into it, right? We're asking them to support that vision. Now, so I'll give you an example with the scenery, right, in Metamorphosis. So as the interviews would really kind of the disruption that happened, because the interviews created the ideology that then we pulled through the theme of the piece. But working with the book, the idea of the book representing knowledge, and it's a 45-minute work. So it starts with a dancer reading a book. And the idea being, and this light shines out of the book into her face, representing her kind of sort of experiencing this knowledge and transformation. And then the piece starts. And then the giant book appears. This is, by the way, scenery designed by Ming Chen from the Department of Theater and Performance Studies. So I would say that would be an example of how the process then asked another collaborator to kind of limit their ideas to it, right? So we gave Ming a very specific thing to do, and then she innovated around that and created that book.
Can I? And what could be, because this is kind of, I can see this two kind of discipline go together. What could be the next step, somebody really, like a software engineer learning from a dancer.
Right.
Also, I'm telling you, we called something choreography, and I understood today that's completely not the case. There is something in services that we call choreography. It's totally wrong, but.
Right. So I guess I would go back to Gil's project at Georgia Tech, because what he's trying to do is as he's working with us in the studio, is to use artificial intelligence for the robots to make their own physical decisions, if that makes sense, right? So in hopefully the next phase of this project, as they continue to develop that, they will use different stimuli and to help create the functionality of the robot, and then the dancer in real time in front of the robot will have the robot respond to that movement, but by making its own decisions, if that makes sense. I hope no one from Georgia Tech is watching. Because I probably explained that a really terrible way.
No, I think it's, I would ask Ian to tell us what's happening in the world of robotics, but I think it's very similar with self-driving cars in that your car is picking up on cues from you as the passive passenger. I know we've got some faculty who are working on this in the Marietta campus. So I think the applications are incredible. I think we have time for one more question.
So this is one question. I love that you talk about the arts community and the idea of interdisciplinarity and all that. We always talk about interdisciplinarity, and I'm curious at what disruptive strategies you see possible now in your view on the fourth floor for making those collaborations more possible in terms of curricular structures and just finding ways to make it doable.
Right. So I'll just say this, I don't have the answer, right? But I think all of our fields are changing and transforming and morphing constantly, right? And what we are realizing, certainly, let me use this example. It's no longer about teaching students the skill of how to do something, because that's something maybe irrelevant in 5 years, right? Because technology is changing, the world is changing. So what we have to teach them is skill to respond to something around them, right? And that requires this sort of multi-pronged approach, an interdisciplinary way of thinking about things and problem solving. So I don't really have an answer, Margaret, because I'm just interim. And I've been told not to disrupt anything. I'm trying not to. But here's, I think it's a question we're all asking ourselves, right? In our disciplines, in our fields, certainly in the arts, that how can we better prepare our students for the world that's ahead, that is perhaps not one of the silos we were raised in, but one of much more an interdisciplinary way of thinking. And so I think the academy will come along, and certainly you're right, we have a responsibility to start thinking about that more actively than we do. So thank you.
Thank you for that question. We are out of time, so I want to thank our guest, Ivan Pulinkala. One more round of applause.
Thank you.
And because this is our last show, as I keep calling it, of the season, I really want us to thank, with a round of applause, the hardworking staff that makes this all possible. And that is Heather Hedgepeth, Tom Boyle, Joelle Walls, Jess, Chris, and Jeremy from the Broadcast and Event AV staff. Oh, and I learned that I was your favorite VP, so thank you for that. So a big round of applause for them. Before we close, I do want to share with you a few announcements. The College of the Arts will be having a performance tomorrow at 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. of their KSU holiday concert. So if you haven't purchased your tickets, we please ask for you to do that. You can also make reservations online at arts.kennesaw.edu. The Zuckerman Museum of Art will host 2 performances by students currently enrolled in a special topics course called Site-Specific Choreography, Process, and Procession. And the performance was created to accompany and in union with the museum's fall exhibits. On behalf of the Office of Research, I want to say thank you all to those who are attending in person and for those who have been attending through KSU TV. And with that, have a wonderful and safe, happy holiday weekend and month to come. So we'll see you next season.